Before you realize it's happening, fear has already moved in quietly, like a shadow that learned the shape of your room while you were asleep. It doesn't crash through the door or announce itself with sirens. It settles in softly, rearranging the furniture of your mind while you're distracted with living. You wake up one day and call it intuition, call it being realistic, call it maturity, never noticing how much smaller your world has become. This is how fear survives. Not by screaming, but by whispering. Not by force, but by familiarity. And the most unsettling part is that you probably believe every thought it gives you belongs to you. Think about the last time you hesitated before speaking, before trying, before choosing something you secretly wanted. There was a pause, almost invisible, where a voice stepped in and said, "Maybe not." It didn't sound cruel. It sounded reasonable. It reminded you of consequences, of past mistakes, of embarrassment, of loss. It dressed itself as protection. That's fear's favorite disguise. It never tells you it wants control. It tells you it wants safety. And because you're human, because your brain evolved to survive long before it evolved to dream, you listen. Fear didn't start as your enemy. It was born as your guardian. Thousands of years ago, fear kept your ancestors alive in the dark, taught them which sounds meant danger and which shadows could kill. The problem isn't that fear exists. The problem is that your mind still treats emotional discomfort like a physical threat. Rejection feels like exile. Failure feels like death. Uncertainty feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. So fear reacts the same way it always has, flooding your body with urgency, tightening your chest, narrowing your vision until the only thing you can see is escape. And in that moment, your world shrinks to the size of what feels safe. What fear really controls isn't your actions. It controls your attention. It decides which thoughts get amplified and which ones fade into silence. It keeps replaying the same mental images, the same worst-case scenarios, until they feel more real than the present moment. You might notice how your mind clings to a single negative comment while ignoring 100 quiet approvals, how one memory of embarrassment can outweigh years of growth. That's not weakness, that's conditioning. Fear trains your mind like a spotlight operator who only knows how to aim at danger, even when the stage is full of possibility. Over time, fear becomes less like an intruder and more like a narrator. It explains your life to you. It tells you why you shouldn't apply, shouldn't leave, shouldn't speak, shouldn't love too deeply. It tells you stories about who you are and what will happen if you step outside the invisible lines it's drawn. And the scariest part is how convincing those stories sound, because they're built from fragments of truth. Yes, you could fail. Yes, you could get hurt. Yes, things could go wrong. Fear never lies outright. It just edits out every other possible ending. You might start noticing how often fear speaks in the language of certainty. It says, "You already know how this ends," or "People like you don't get that," or "This is just how the world works." It frames imagination as delusion and hope as naivety. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it rewires your sense of identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone becoming and start seeing yourself as someone managing damage. Dreams turn into risks. Curiosity turns into caution. And one day you wake up living a life that feels oddly quiet, oddly numb, and you can't remember when you agreed to give so much of yourself away. Fear thrives in repetition. Every time you avoid something because it scares you, your brain learns that avoidance works. The relief you feel afterward, that brief calm, becomes a reward. And your nervous system takes notes. It doesn't care about long-term fulfillment. It cares about immediate relief. So the next time a similar situation appears, fear gets louder, faster, more convincing. This is how prisons are built without walls. This is how you end up negotiating with your own potential, asking it to wait, promising you'll be ready someday, when someday keeps moving further away. What makes fear so powerful is that it rarely feels dramatic. It feels ordinary. It shows up as procrastination, as overthinking, as endless preparation that never turns into action. It shows up as scrolling instead of creating, staying silent instead of asking, settling instead of choosing. From the outside, it looks like a normal life. From the inside, it feels like a quiet ache you can't quite name. You tell yourself you're fine because nothing is technically wrong, and yet something feels unfinished, like a sentence that never reaches its end. Fear also loves isolation. It convinces you that you're alone in your doubts, that everyone else has it figured out, that your hesitation is a personal flaw rather than a shared human experience. It keeps you trapped inside your own head, replaying conversations that haven't happened yet, rehearsing defenses against judgments that may never come. And the more time you spend there, the more real those imagined threats become. Your body reacts as if they're happening now. Your heart races. Your muscles tense. Your breath shortens. Fear doesn't just live in your thoughts. It lives in your nervous system. At some point, fear stops feeling like fear and starts feeling like you. You say things like, "I'm just not that kind of person," or "I don't take risks," or "I prefer to stay comfortable," without realizing these are conclusions. Fear helped you reach. It shapes your personality by narrowing your choices. It convinces you that growth is dangerous and that staying the same is neutral, even though staying the same slowly erodes you from the inside. You might not notice it day to day, but years later you feel the weight of all the versions of yourself that never got a chance to exist. And yet, buried underneath fear's constant narration, there's another signal. Quieter, less urgent, but steady. It shows up as restlessness, as envy you don't want to admit, as a strange sadness when you see someone else doing what you secretly want to do. That signal isn't trying to scare you. It's trying to tell you the truth. It's the part of you that knows safety and fulfillment are not the same thing. It's the part that understands that avoiding pain also means avoiding depth, meaning, and aliveness. Fear will tell you that listening to that voice is irresponsible, that it's reckless, that it will lead to regret. But fear never talks about the regret of not trying. It never shows you the quiet grief of a life spent hiding, the slow erosion of self-trust that comes from constantly choosing comfort over honesty. It doesn't show you the cost of shrinking, because that cost is paid gradually, in moments so small they're easy to ignore. A conversation not started, a chance not taken, a truth swallowed. The moment fear begins to lose its grip isn't when it disappears, it's when you see it clearly. When you notice the pattern, when you realize that the voice saying "don't" has been wrong before, that it predicted disasters that never came, that it underestimated your ability to adapt, to learn, to survive. Awareness doesn't silence fear, but it changes your relationship to it. You stop treating every warning as a command. You start hearing fear as information, not instruction. This shift is subtle, but it's profound. You begin to pause instead of automatically obeying. You ask yourself whether the danger is real or imagined, present or inherited, yours or someone else's. You notice how fear spikes right before growth, right before change, right before something meaningful. And slowly you start to understand that fear isn't a stop sign. It's a threshold. It marks the edge of what you know, not the limit of what you're capable of. When you move toward what scares you, something unexpected happens. Fear doesn't vanish, but it changes texture. It becomes sharper, clearer, more honest. It stops spinning endless stories and focuses on the present moment. Your body learns that discomfort isn't fatal, that anxiety rises and falls, that you can feel afraid and still act. Each time you do this, you reclaim a small piece of your mind. Each time you don't, fear tightens its grip just a little more. You were never meant to live without fear. You were meant to live with it, without letting it decide everything for you. Fear is a signal, not a sentence. It's a feeling, not a prophecy. And the life you want isn't on the other side of fear disappearing. It's on the other side of you deciding that fear no longer gets the final word. There's a moment, usually quiet and unremarkable, when you begin to notice how often fear has been speaking on your behalf. It's not dramatic. Nothing collapses. You just catch yourself mid-thought, mid-excuse, and realize you've heard this reasoning before. You recognize the pattern in the way your chest tightens before you even decide, in the way your mind rushes ahead to consequences instead of possibilities. And for the first time, Instead of arguing with fear or trying to get rid of it, you simply observe it. That observation alone starts to loosen something. Fear hates being seen. It thrives in automation, in habits you never question, in reactions that happen faster than awareness. The second you slow down enough to notice it, fear loses its illusion of authority. It's no longer a law, it's just a voice. And voices can be questioned. When you stop immediately obeying, when you give yourself even a few seconds of space, you begin to feel something unfamiliar underneath the anxiety. A sense of choice, not certainty, not confidence, choice, and that changes everything. You start realizing how much of your mental energy has been spent rehearsing danger instead of inhabiting your life. How often you've lived in futures that never arrived, carrying the emotional weight of events that existed only in imagination. Fear pulled you forward into outcomes you couldn't control, while pulling you away from the only place you ever actually live, this moment right now. And being here, fully here, feels strange at first, almost unsafe, because fear taught you that vigilance equals control, that constant scanning equals preparedness. Letting go of that tension feels like stepping into open water without armor. But something else happens when you stay present. You notice that most moments are survivable, that conversations don't end you, that mistakes don't erase you, that awkwardness fades, that rejection hurts, but it doesn't destroy. Your nervous system begins to relearn what your mind forgot. That discomfort is temporary, that emotions move, that you are more resilient than fear ever gave you credit for. This isn't positive thinking, it's lived evidence. And evidence is something fear struggles to argue with. As you gather more of these moments, fear changes its tactics. It gets subtler. It shifts from outright warnings to quiet negotiations. It says not today, instead of never. It tells you to wait, until you're more prepared, more healed, more confident. It promises a future version of you who won't feel this scared. And that promise sounds reasonable, almost kind. But if you listen closely, you'll hear the same delay wrapped in softer language. Fear isn't against your dreams, it's against now. The truth fear never mentions is that readiness is a feeling that follows action, not the other way around. Confidence doesn't arrive before you begin. It grows because you began while feeling unsure. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision that something else matters more. And every time you choose despite fear, you send a signal to your brain that rewrites old assumptions. You teach yourself that safety isn't found in avoidance, but in self-trust. Self-trust is what fear erodes first. It convinces you that you can't handle outcomes you've never actually faced. It underestimates you by keeping your reference point stuck in the past, frozen at the moment you felt weakest. But you are not the same person you were then. You've survived things fear told you would break you. You've adapted, learned, endured, and still fear speaks as if you're fragile, as if growth hasn't already been happening quietly, even in the background of your doubt. When you begin acting from self-trust instead of fear, life feels different. Not easier, but more honest. You stop performing safety and start pursuing meaning. You say things that matter, even if your voice shakes. You choose paths that excite and terrify you in equal measure. You allow yourself to want things without immediately dismantling them with logic. And in doing so, you feel more alive than you have in a long time. Not because everything is going well, but because you're finally participating. Fear will still show up. It always does. It will still try to pull you back into old narratives, especially when something matters deeply. But now you recognize it. You thank it for trying to protect you, and you move anyway. You understand that fear doesn't need to disappear for you to live fully. It just needs to stop driving. You can carry fear with you like a nervous passenger, instead of letting it grip the steering wheel. Over time, you notice a quiet shift in your inner world. The constant background tension softens. Your thoughts feel less crowded, less hostile. You spend less time explaining yourself to invisible critics, and more time listening to what actually feels true. You stop asking, what if this goes wrong? And start asking, what if I don't try? That question lingers differently. It doesn't spike your anxiety. It settles into your chest like a reminder of what's at stake. Eventually, you understand something fear never wanted you to realize. That the mind it controls isn't broken. It's protective. It learned these patterns because at some point they helped you survive. Fear isn't an enemy to defeat. It's a habit to outgrow. And growth doesn't come from fighting yourself. It comes from integrating what once kept you safe with who you are becoming now. Your mind was never meant to be ruled by fear. It was meant to be informed by it, tempered by it, but guided by something deeper. Curiosity, purpose, values, love. Those things don't shout. They don't rush you. They wait patiently until you're quiet enough to hear them. And when you do, you realize that fear has been loud because it was afraid of being replaced. The moment you choose to live anyway, to speak anyway, to step forward anyway, fear loses its throne. It becomes just one voice among many, no longer the loudest, no longer the final authority. And in that space, that reclaimed space, your mind begins to feel like your own again.